INFJs often seem to other people as calm, insightful, and purposeful. However, beneath that carefully constructed exterior lies a complexity that even INFJs themselves often fail to recognize. While they pride themselves on self-awareness, there are aspects of their own psyche that remain hidden to them, blind spots that subtly shape their behavior and relationships in ways they rarely acknowledge. One of them is the subtle rigidity that comes with the INFJ vision of the world. They thrive on creating meaning, weaving narratives, and sensing deeper truths. Yet, this very gift can trap them in an internal echo chamber. Once they latch onto an interpretation of a person or situation, they may mistake their intuition for absolute truth. To them, the gut feeling is so strong, so visceral, that it feels unquestionable. What they don't always see is that their intuition, though powerful, is not infallible. It can be colored by personal bias, past experiences, or emotional undercurrents. They may cling to these interpretations as fact and resist evidence that contradicts their inner narrative, which can make them come across as stubborn in ways they fail to recognize. There's also their tendency toward emotional manipulation, not in a conscious or malicious sense, but as a byproduct of their ability to deeply understand people. INFJs instinctively know what makes others tick, what inspires them, what wounds them. They use this sensitivity to comfort, encourage, or guide. However, when they feel threatened, insecure, or unheard, they may unconsciously wield this gift to steer people's feelings or decisions in subtle ways. To the INFJ, it feels like they're helping or protecting harmony. But to others, it can come across as passive-aggressive, controlling, or guilt-inducing. Because INFJs see themselves as benevolent and selfless, they often fail to realize that they too can fall into patterns of manipulation cloaked in good intentions. There's also their deep need for authenticity. INFJs despise superficiality and long for raw, meaningful relationships. They pride themselves on being genuine and expect the same from others. Yet, paradoxically, they can be some of the most guarded individuals. They present curated fragments of themselves, withholding the messier parts out of fear of being misunderstood or rejected. To others, this creates an aura of mystery, but it also means that INFJs sometimes fail to live up to the very authenticity they demand. They are so accustomed to reading others that they forget not everyone can read them, and this discrepancy can leave them feeling unseen, even though they were the ones who hid in the first place. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Playbook today. The link is in the description of this video. INFJs also underestimate the quiet pride they carry in being rare or different. They are often told from an early age that they are unique, that they think differently, and that their depth sets them apart. Over time, this becomes part of their identity, a hidden badge of honor. While this self-concept fuels their confidence, it can also foster a subtle elitism. They may quietly dismiss people they deem shallow or unawakened, assuming that only a select few can truly understand them. This superiority is rarely admitted, even to themselves, because it contradicts their self-image of humility and compassion. Yet it lingers in their subconscious, shaping how they choose their circles and whom they let into their world. Perfectionism is another blind spot that INFJs wrestle with, though they often reframe it as high standards. They strive for an ideal vision in their careers, relationships, and personal growth, and they can be harshly self-critical when they fall short. What they fail to see is how this perfectionism bleeds into their interactions with others. They may hold silent expectations for how people should behave, love, or communicate, then withdraw or grow resentful when those standards are unmet. Because they often don't voice these expectations directly, they fail to notice how unfair it is to expect others to live up to a script that was never shared. There's also avoidance of conflict. INFJs cherish harmony, and they will go to great lengths to preserve it, even if it means silencing themselves. They convince themselves that withholding their frustration or hurt is the noble choice, that they are sparing others from discomfort. Yet, in reality, this avoidance can lead to emotional bottling, passive-aggressive remarks, or sudden emotional explosions when the pressure becomes too much. The INFJ often fails to recognize how destructive this avoidance can be, both to themselves and to their relationships, because they believe they are merely protecting peace. There's also their self-sacrificial tendencies. They see themselves as givers, protectors, and healers, and they take pride in pouring themselves into others. But underneath this altruism is sometimes a covert expectation to be appreciated, reciprocated, or recognized as indispensable. When this doesn't happen, the INFJ may feel unappreciated, misunderstood, or even betrayed. They fail to notice that their sacrifices, while genuine in intent, are not always as selfless as they appear. Sometimes, they give not just out of love, but out of an unconscious desire to secure loyalty, love, or validation. There's also their complicated relationship with vulnerability. While INFJs yearn for deep emotional intimacy, they often construct inner fortresses that are nearly impossible to breach. They give the impression of being open because they listen so attentively, ask probing questions, and create safe spaces for others to share. Yet, they seldom expose their own rawness in equal measure. They may share fragments of their story, carefully selected pieces that maintain the illusion of intimacy without actually revealing their tenderest truths. This selective vulnerability allows them to maintain control of how others see them, but they fail to realize that it can create imbalanced relationships where they are perpetually the listener, healer, or guide, and rarely the one who is truly known. Another blind spot lies in how easily INFJs can romanticize suffering. They are deeply sensitive to pain, their own and that of others, and in this sensitivity, they often find meaning in their struggles. While this gives them resilience and empathy, it can also lead them to subconsciously hold on to pain longer than necessary, as though their wounds are proof of depth or purpose. They may fail to see how this attachment to suffering keeps them from fully embracing joy or simplicity, or how it sometimes isolates them from others who cannot relate to such intensity. Their belief that pain is a gateway to transformation blinds them to the possibility that not all growth must be born from hardship. INFJs also often fail to recognize the subtle martyrdom that colors their daily lives. They may overextend themselves in relationships, workplaces, or communities, convincing themselves that they are doing so out of pure love or duty. But underneath this selflessness lurks an unspoken hope that their sacrifices will eventually be acknowledged and rewarded. When this recognition doesn't come, they can feel quietly resentful, even victimized, without realizing that they set themselves up for disappointment by offering more than was ever asked. They fail to see that their tendency to suffer silently for the greater good is not always noble. At times, it's an unconscious attempt to secure a moral high ground or avoid the discomfort of simply stating their needs. There's also their tendency to live in ideals at the expense of reality. They carry powerful visions of how relationships, careers, or life in general should unfold. This makes them dreamers and visionaries, but also blinds them to the present moment. They may overlook the beauty of what is because they are so invested in what could be. For instance, they might hold on to a relationship not because it's healthy, but because of its potential, believing that with enough time, patience, or effort, it will transform into the ideal they imagine. This can keep them tethered to situations long after they've ceased to nourish them. And yet the INFJ often doesn't see how their idealism works against them. INFJs underestimate their own emotional volatility. To the outside world, they appear composed, rational, and steady. But beneath that calm surface, emotions run like an undercurrent, powerful and sometimes overwhelming. INFJs are often unaware of how strongly their moods affect the energy of a room or the people around them. Because they internalize so much, they may believe they're hiding their turbulence, when in reality, those close to them can feel the unspoken tension. Their failure to acknowledge this emotional leakage means they don't always take responsibility for the way their inner storms subtly shape their environments. INFJs also often fail to confront the ways they can become overly protective, even possessive, of the people they love. Their deep loyalty and empathy drive them to want the best for others. But this can slip into controlling behavior masked as concern. They might discourage a loved one from taking risks or pursuing paths that they intuitively sense will lead to pain. To them, it feels like care and foresight. To others, it can feel suffocating. INFJs rarely recognize how their protective instincts sometimes infringe on another person's freedom to make their own mistakes and grow from them. INFJs fail to see how much they exhaust themselves trying to live as paradoxes. They long to be independent, yet deeply crave connection. They want to save the world, yet often resent how draining people can be. They pride themselves on being compassionate, but secretly carry judgments they don't voice. This tug-of-war between extremes is part of their complexity, but what they often miss is how much it wears them down. They struggle to reconcile these contradictions and can end up blaming others, or circumstances, for the inner fatigue that really stems from trying to be everything at once. Another flaw that INFJs often fail to see in themselves is their hidden impatience with the pace of others. On the surface, they seem endlessly patient, listening, guiding, offering encouragement, but beneath that calm exterior lies a frustration that not everyone gets it as quickly as they do. They often process life at such an accelerated, intuitive level that when others struggle to connect dots or resist deeper reflection, INFJs quietly grow irritated. Because they dislike conflict, they rarely voice this frustration, but it leaks out through subtle withdrawal, judgmental silences, or an aloof distance. They may not realize how dismissive they appear to those who simply don't operate at their level of insight. There's also their tendency to over-identify with being misunderstood. While it's true that INFJs often feel different or alien in groups, they sometimes exaggerate this sense of otherness as part of their self-narrative. They see themselves as perpetual outsiders, overlooked prophets, or visionaries destined to be unseen until later. What they fail to notice is that this belief can become self-fulfilling. By clinging to the identity of "no one really understands me," they unconsciously create distance from others, rejecting chances for belonging or dismissing connections that could actually meet them halfway. They sometimes hide behind the cloak of being misunderstood instead of taking the vulnerable risk of truly letting people in. INFJs can fail to recognize how their deep introspection can veer into self-absorption. They spend so much time analyzing their feelings, their growth, their purpose, and their place in the world that they may unknowingly center themselves in every narrative. They see themselves as givers, yet often everything filters back to their personal meaning-making process. In their quest for understanding, they sometimes overlook the simpler truth that not every interaction needs to be dissected, not every relationship must serve a grand purpose, and not every feeling needs decoding. Their tendency to spiral inward can make them less present for others than they believe they are. There is also their hidden struggle with decisiveness. INFJs appear determined once they've settled on a course of action, but the path to reaching that decision is often fraught with hesitation, overanalysis, and doubt. They fail to recognize how often they delay choices, waiting for the perfect alignment of intuition and logic. This hesitation can cause them to miss opportunities or frustrate those around them who need clarity. Yet, because they frame their indecision as careful consideration or waiting for the right timing, they don't always see it as a weakness. INFJs can fail to notice how they sometimes overextend their empathy in unhealthy ways. Their ability to sense the emotions of others often compels them to take responsibility for fixing those emotions. They may insert themselves into situations as healers or mediators, believing it is their duty to soothe, comfort, or resolve. What they don't always recognize is how this strips others of the agency to manage their own feelings. By trying to shoulder everyone's burdens, they unconsciously foster dependency or resentment, while simultaneously draining themselves to the point of burnout. There's also their tendency to test loyalty without admitting it. INFJs crave unwavering trust and loyalty, and they sometimes orchestrate scenarios, often unconsciously, where they withdraw, go silent, or withhold affection just to see if the other person will chase them, notice, or prove their devotion. To the INFJ, this is rarely recognized as manipulation. It feels more like reassurance seeking. But they fail to realize how confusing or hurtful it can be for others who don't understand the unspoken rules of these loyalty tests. INFJs fail to see how much they sometimes trap themselves in narratives of destiny. They have a strong sense that their life has a unique purpose, and while this gives them drive, it can also keep them perpetually dissatisfied. If a job, relationship, or project doesn't feel fated or significant enough, they may dismiss it prematurely. This restless search for ultimate meaning blinds them to the richness of ordinary experiences. They don't always notice how much they overlook the small, grounding joys of daily life because they're scanning the horizon for the next big calling that will validate their sense of destiny. INFJs can have difficulty accepting compliments or recognition without attaching guilt to it. On the surface, they might smile politely or thank the giver, but internally they often wrestle with an uneasiness, as if being praised somehow clashes with their self-image of humility and quiet service. They may even deflect compliments by pointing out their flaws or crediting others instead, failing to notice how this habit prevents them from fully receiving appreciation. Over time, this tendency can create an invisible wall between them and others who simply want to celebrate them, leaving the INFJ unknowingly reinforcing the belief that they must always be the giver and never the one receiving. INFJs also often fail to notice how deeply they struggle with endings. Whether it's the close of a friendship, a shift in career, or the natural fading of a phase of life, they hold on long after it's time to let go. Their attachment to meaning makes them resistant to closing chapters, because to them, endings feel like failures or wasted potential. They fail to recognize how this lingering can sometimes prevent both themselves and others from moving forward freely. They may stay emotionally entangled in relationships that no longer serve them, convincing themselves that one more effort will restore what once was, all while not seeing how much energy and time is being consumed by something that should already have been released. There's also their complicated relationship with solitude. INFJs insist they need alone time to recharge, and this is undeniably true. But what they fail to notice is how easily solitude can slip into avoidance. They may retreat under the guise of needing space, when in reality they're withdrawing to escape difficult conversations, unmet expectations, or feelings they don't want to confront. To them, it feels like a noble act of protecting harmony and preserving their energy, but in truth it can foster distance in relationships and leave problems unresolved. There is also a hidden struggle with resentment that INFJs rarely acknowledge. Because they pride themselves on being selfless, they often suppress their irritation when others take advantage of their generosity. They convince themselves they are above such petty feelings, yet those unspoken irritations accumulate quietly until they harden into resentment. They fail to see how this passive buildup poisons their relationships more than honest expression of needs ever would. Their silence feels protective in the moment, but the hidden bitterness that follows can damage trust in ways they never intended. Another flaw is their tendency to live in dual extremes when it comes to hope and despair. INFJs can envision radiant futures filled with meaning and beauty, but when reality falls short, they can swing into private hopelessness with startling speed. They fail to recognize how destabilizing this inner pendulum is, not only for themselves but for those close to them who feel the unpredictable intensity. Because INFJs usually keep these extremes hidden, they may not see the emotional whiplash they inadvertently create in their relationships when they alternate between idealistic optimism and sudden withdrawal into despair. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Playbook today. The link is in the description of this video.